Okay, welcome everyone. We are now broadcasting live. This is the Booktalk Nation chat with Roxane Gay. As you'll see, this works a little bit like an author event in a bookstore. Roxane's going to talk about her new book, An Untamed State. If you don't have a copy of that book, you can order it right here on this page or at booktalknation.com. Roxane is signing and personalizing all of those books, but you'll need to make sure you get your order in by tonight. Those sales will close tonight for signed and personalized copies of the book. We also have a chat function tonight. As you'll see, there's a chat box underneath the video window. You can go ahead and type in questions for Roxane and Maud in that chat box there. In about 20 minutes, we're going to go ahead and pull some of those questions. And Roxane will answer them live here in the video chat. And she'll also answer some of the questions that you submitted ahead of time on the site when you RSVP'd for the event. So we'll get to that in about 20 minutes. Before that, we're going to turn it over to our interviewer tonight, Maud. Maud Newton will be interviewing Roxane. So I'd like to give a short introduction for both Roxane and Maud, and then I will turn it over to them. So Roxane Gay, her writing has appeared in Best American Short Stories 2012, Best Sex Writing 2012, Oxford American American Short Fiction, West Branch, Virginia Quarterly Review, Noon, the New York Times Book Review, the Los Angeles Times, the Rumpus Salon, and many more. She's a co-editor of Pink and essays editor for the Rumpus. She teaches writing at Eastern Illinois University, and as we said, her novel An Untamed State is out now, and you can go ahead and order that right here. And Maud, who is also joining us, is a writer and critic whose writing has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Narrative Magazine, Book Forum, and more publications. She's working on a book about the science and superstition of ancestry. So, welcome, Maud, and welcome, Roxane. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and I'll check back in about 20 minutes.
All right.
Roxane, it's such a pleasure to be here, almost meeting you, finally, after admiring you and your writing for so long. And I have to say, personally, it's just been wonderful to see all of the excitement. I can't think of a writer who's more universally beloved, and justly so. So it's been really great to see that. And now, why don't we talk about An Untamed State?
Let's do that.
This is my first video interview. I'm sure you can't tell. So this is a really intense book. It's a very, very honest book. It's about anger, it's about love, it's about forgiveness, it's about loneliness, it's about abandonment. And I just wondered, how did it start? What was the first thing that occurred to you when you sat down to write this?
Definitely. It started as a short story, and the short story started because I was thinking about what would it be like to be kidnapped and then have someone not pay the ransom. So I was thinking about sort of what is something terrible that could happen, but like then the even more unexpected and more terrible happens. And how do you overcome the betrayal that comes with someone not trying to get you back in such a situation? And from there, the novel just rose.
So when I imagine that it wasn't the easiest novel to write.
No, it wasn't. There were definitely some difficult days where I was just I depressed myself. I made myself cry, but I knew that I was on the right track when I had those dark days. And so I just tried to do what I had to do to take care of myself and sometimes just step away and then come back to the book when I had cleared my head a little bit. But yeah, it was definitely a hard book to write, not only in terms of the darkness of the book and the violence, but also in terms of not wanting people to read this book and think that it's the only story worth telling about Haiti. And I hate that as a writer of color I'm put in that position where my work somehow will be representative instead of just one novel. And so that was also definitely hard to write through, but in the end I just decided I'm going to do what any other sort of, like what a Franzen would do and just write the book I want to write. So yeah, it was difficult.
I liked the prior iteration of that quote that I saw on the internet. It was less family friendly, but yeah, I really admire that you didn't sort of bear the responsibility of, you know, speaking for all Haitians, for the entire country, for all time. You told the story that you wanted to tell and that you needed to tell, and I think that's a really important point, that someone like Franzen isn't going to be worried about that. And
No.
so to get back to what you were saying about the emotional difficulties of writing this, I was wondering, I've thought about this a lot with writing. Toni Morrison, I think, said, I'm sure I'm not quoting her properly, but she said that getting sort of into very intense emotions and writing from that place can actually hinder the work. But I haven't necessarily found that to be true, and it doesn't sound like you've necessarily found that to be true.
No, I haven't. In fact, I prefer to go to an emotional place when I'm writing, and for me, that makes the writing easier. So yeah, yes, it was emotionally intense at times to write this, but it didn't hinder the writing. It only helped the writing because it reinforced the sense that I was on the right path the more the writing came to me. And so I loved it in terms of just really sort of bearing those emotions and cutting them wide open as they needed to be.
Do you find yourself trying to write from that place, ideally, from that sort of like quickened emotional place?
Absolutely. I think most of my writing comes from that quickened emotional place. And you know, I want the reader to feel something, and not in a way that's manipulative, but definitely in a way that makes them forget that they're reading a book and pulls them into the story, that creates some kind of immersive quality. Because I feel that immersive quality when I'm writing. I try to imagine myself as the protagonist of a story oftentimes, and sort of spend a lot of time before I ever commit words to the page, imagining what it would be like to sort of move through the world as that character, and it just makes it so much easier to go to the deep emotional places that my work tends to go to.
One of the things I really admire about your work is the honesty of it. It never does feel manipulative, and it's true in your fiction and it's true in your nonfiction as well. It feels very true. And do you find yourself thinking about trying to create an emotional response in the reader while you're writing?
No, not while I'm writing. It's something that I hope for, but it's not something that I try and orchestrate. Either it's going to be there or it's not. And so after I've written a passage or a story or a chapter, I'll generally go back and read it, and if I have somehow managed to make myself feel something and make myself forget that I've written it, then I know I'm on the right track. And if it's not there, then I know I'm not, and I just try again.
Do you have you encountered, have people questioned your portrayal of Haiti, or is this more something that you've been afraid of? Or concerned about, I should say.
No one has questioned it yet, but it's just something I've been afraid of because I feel protective of Haiti. It's a country I love, and I'm very proud to be Haitian. And so I don't, you know, I just feel very protective, and so I don't want people to misunderstand the country. I think that violent things happen to people everywhere, and when you write about violence in the United States, no one says, oh, well, we're not going to go to Boston now. And so I really do worry about that. But so far, the response from Haitian readers, I've talked to a few, has been very good. First and foremost, of course, was Edwidge Danticat, and she was the one person who I thought, if she hates this book, then I don't know what I'm going to do. But fortunately, she was extraordinarily gracious, and she really liked the book, loved the book, I want to say, and she gave a really generous blurb and has stayed in touch with me, and I really appreciate that. And other Haitian writers have and Haitian people have also read it and said that they really liked the book. And they've also understood that it's fiction. It's a novel.
Absolutely. It's all from your protagonist's point of view. This is her experience.
Correct.
Okay.
It's not a nonfiction book about the story. It's not a nonfiction book about kidnapping. It's truly one family story.
So do you feel like talking about how, if at all, your own life experiences have fed into this book, if they have?
Sure. I definitely, my father is an engineer, so he would totally pay for me. And he started a construction company. So I definitely drew from my own experiences growing up in Nebraska and growing up as the child of Haitian immigrants. And it was a starting point, but that's it. And then I just created everything out of fiction, particularly where the family members are concerned, because I like my family, and so I didn't want to use them as templates for any of the characters in the book. But I did start with my own life as a starting point, sort of, for who Mireille was and is, and what her life was like.
Do you've written so intelligently about the portrayal of rape, about women and sexual violence. And I wonder how you balance your theoretical ideas with your fiction writing, in the sense that, obviously you don't want your theoretical ideas, your convictions, to weigh down the story, and I don't feel that they do. But was that a concern for you, or is that ever a concern for you?
Yes, definitely. I have a lot of very strong opinions about how we portray rape and sexual violence in art, and all violence for that matter. And for me, and I think there are multiple ways, but for me the best way was to stare it straight down and to write explicitly and not write around the violence. I think that you have to make it unreadable. You have to want to look away, and instead of thinking that it's glossy and stylized, because that's not what the experience is. And though this is fiction, I'm also very concerned with truth, and how do you get to the truth of what an experience like this must be like. And so I was very committed to staring the violence down, and I think that's what made it so difficult to write certain parts of the novel. But I also knew, especially after the novel was finished, I knew I had made the right decision. And in terms of balancing, my theoretical ideas with fiction, with telling a story, I always go back to Alice Walker's Possessing the Secret of Joy, which is a deeply political novel, but is also a beautiful, beautiful novel. It's a story. And also J.R. Cutsy's Disgrace. It's not J.R., it's J.M. Anyway, Disgrace is also another novel that has a strong political agenda, but you never forget that you're reading a novel. And so I definitely found those books to be really helpful in reminding me of where that line was.
Are there writers, obviously both of those writers have written a lot about sex, but are there other writers whose writings about sex have been an inspiration, or the opposite?
Mary Gateskill has definitely been an inspiration. Susan Minot does sex really, really well. Mary Gateskill is pretty much the top one for me. I just come back to her over and over again. And, I must say, Joyce Carol Oates, who does some really interesting things. When she's good, she's very, very good. And I do draw a lot from her. I like what Toni Morrison does in some of her writing. She doesn't write about sex as much as other writers, but it's definitely there. And she does write about bodies. And that interests me very much, even beyond sex, sort of how do we inhabit bodies? How do we inhabit black bodies? And what are the consequences of doing so? And so those are some of the writers that have definitely shaped how I come to writing.
How do your work has such an empathetic and expansive quality, in the sense that it portrays and holds all of these very different emotions with complete accuracy and realism. And how do you, is that something that you think comes naturally to you, or have you worked at that over time?
I do think it's something that comes naturally. My writing has just always been firmly grounded in realism. I can do other things, but finding ways of capturing life and reality and surreality is just something I've always done. And I think I've definitely matured in how I depict reality or try to get at truth in fiction. But
Oh.
what?
How so?
I definitely have learned to be, like, when I look at a lot of my writing from my late teens and early 20s, it was deeply melodramatic, and it was manipulative in trying to get people to feel something. And so I've learned to pull back, I hope, and I'm continuing to learn to pull back and to not force moments, either good or bad, and to just let them evolve a little more organically within a story or a narrative. And so I'm just getting better about being more controlled in terms of how I deal with emotion on the page, because I used to just let it all out, and it was more therapeutic at that point, and now it's more artistic. Yeah, it's more artistic.
Do you find, I mean, you write so many things so well. Do you find some of those other ambitions and desires being channeled into your nonfiction? By which I mean, obviously you've vastly matured since you were a teenager, but do you find those impulses still showing up at all? And if so, do they tend to come out in your nonfiction more?
Those impulses are there every day, and I just have to sort of beat them out of myself. And they do come out in my nonfiction, especially because my nonfiction is where I'm working through my rage. Just, can you see this terrible thing that's happening in the world? But then I pull back and I try to just think about, how do I go beyond the most obvious argument and the most obvious thing that's being said? And it's not always easy, simply because the way the internet publishing cycle works, you don't have time to even get to that place of nuance. And, like today I got emails asking me to write about Jay-Z and Solange, and it's like they need it tomorrow, and I'll try because the money's good, but it's hard to really do good work under those circumstances. And so I really, especially in the past few months, have tried to just slow down and give myself the time to go beyond my first reaction, because my first reaction is generally not my most mature reaction.
I want to be clear that I wasn't in any way implying that.
No, I didn't think you were. I didn't think you were. That's actually something that's on my mind quite all the time.
I really admire actually the way that you are able to, you write in so many different ways. You write blog posts, you write essays, you write criticism, and you really just bring, I don't know, sometimes it feels like you're grappling with these concerns publicly, but in a really genuine and great way. It never feels exhibitionistic or gratuitous to me, but I'm a fan, and I'm sure everyone else who's watching is a fan, and I think we are being told that that the moderator is going to jump back on because some people have questions.
Okay.
Excellent. Hi guys, I'm back. So yes, this is the portion of the chat where the audience members and readers can ask their questions for Roxane and Maud. So as you'll see, that chat box that's underneath this video window where you're watching right now, you can go ahead and type in questions right there. Roxane will answer those for you. And we're going to pull a few questions that were submitted ahead of time when you RSVP'd for the event. So we'll grab a few of those and see if we get any live questions. So let's see, Roxane, first question for you here. You are so amazing on Twitter, which is where I first got to know you and some of your writings. Do you see Twitter changing the relationship you have with your readers? And if so, how? And that's from Jan in Portland.
I don't think it changes the relationship I have with readers. Twitter created the relationship I have with readers because, you're so accessible, or at least a part of you is accessible on Twitter, especially, the way I use Twitter, I'm just going to tell you what I'm thinking. Like, oh, I had this delicious yogurt. you won't believe this TV show I just watched, and holy cow, this amazing thing is happening. I just let it all out, and then, here's a link to something I wrote. And I think that it helps me connect to people because I'm just a person. I mean, I write, but I'm also just human. And so Twitter is just a great connector for me, and it doesn't change anything. I think it's the basis of a lot of the ways in which I connect to readers.
Excellent. Let's see if we have a few more for you here. This is from Joe Smith in Oklahoma City. They say, are you a plotter or a pantser?
I don't know what the last part of the pantser is.
Yeah,
I think pantser, I might go by the seat of my pants. I don't really plot things out. I just jump right in there and hope for the best.
Okay. Let's pull a few more. And to remind people, you can submit your questions live as well. Let's see. This is from Sarah in New Jersey. It says, could you speak to the influence of fairy tale narratives and how these impact an Untamed State?
Yes, definitely. An Untamed State in structure and in tone does a lot with fairy tales and deconstructing fairy tales. I'm always interested in fairy tales because the real versions of them are really kind of terrible for women, and the diluted versions are also terrible for women. And so I was thinking a lot about fairy tales and the sacrifices that they demand and how I could play with that when I wrote An Untamed State.
Okay. I have time for a couple more. Let's see what we have here for you. This is from Kara in New York, and she wants to know if you can talk a little bit about what you're working on next.
Well, I'm working on a few different projects. I have a book coming out in 2016 called Hunger, and so it's a memoir about cooking and weight and bodies, and I don't know what it's going to look like, but the idea started with my blog post on Tumblr, and then I'm working on 3 novel projects. One is a YA project, but it's not really a YA project. That's just what people call it. And then the other 2 are just books that I'm excited about.
Excellent. A lot to look forward to there. And Maud, do you have any final questions for Roxane before we get out of here?
Absolutely. I'm wondering, Roxane, how did you decide which essays to include in Bad Feminists? Because there were so many possibilities. I mean, I think it's incredibly well curated, but I wonder what that selection was like for you.
It was hard to choose, and so I tried to look. Actually, one of the essay collections that really helped me come to a decision about how to do this was Katie Roiphe's last book, and I'm blanking on the title, but it was really well structured as an essay collection, and there were personal essays, and there were essays that were literary criticism, and essays that were more political, and so I was looking at these various bodies or these streams in my work. And that's how I began to assemble the collection, and it begins and ends with more personal essays, so that it begins and ends with coming back to me and what I mean when I say bad feminist.
Well, I'm sure that everybody's really excited to read that one too. When is that one out?
That one is out on August 5th.
Yeah, it's great, everybody.
It's all right.
Do we have time for one more?
I think we do have time for one more. If you have one more, we'll go ahead and fit that in right now.
So you were saying that your novel isn't really a YA novel, but it's just kind of being classified that way.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm always interested in those lines.
Yeah. Well, it's based on a short story, as all my novel ideas are, because there's only so much creativity going on in here. Called The Year I Learned Everything. It was a story I published in Prairie Schooner last year, and also Rookie. And the story is about one of the characters is a high school senior, and she meets a guy who's a college guy, and it's a coming of age type story, and I think that when you have young people and coming of age, it gets plugged into the YA slot, which is okay with me. But when I wrote the story, YA was not ever on my mind, as not for any particular reason. I don't think about genre when I write. I just write. And so it's been interesting to see how people have received the idea of the book.
So, and I am going to squeeze in another audience question for you from Jan R. She said, you mentioned Susan Minot. I wonder if you've read 30 Girls and if you could share any thoughts.
I'm actually 3/4 of a way through 30 Girls right now, and I think it's really timely given everything that's happening right now in Nigeria with the missing, well, not the missing girls, they were taken, they were kidnapped. One of the things that I'm struggling with a bit in 30 Girls is the narrative frame and who so much of the story is focused on with, I'm terrible at remembering names, but the white woman. But I still think Minot did something really admirable with that book, and I hope more people read it. I really, really do, because I think it brings attention to something that we always try to act. We act like it's a one-off or it's an anomaly, and it's not an anomaly. Women are kidnapped every day throughout the world for all sorts of terrible reasons, and Susan Minot really captures that quite well in 30 Girls.
And I think with that about brings us to our time to wrap up our event tonight. Before we do go, I want to remind everyone that Roxane's book, An Untamed State, is available right here on this page or at booktalknation.com. She's signing and personalizing in your name any of those copies that are purchased here. And that will all be fulfilled by an independent bookstore, Books and Books, in Miami, Florida, will fulfill all those orders and ship them right to your door. If you want the signed and personalized copy, though, you'll have to make sure you get that order in by tonight. The sales will close tonight. I believe they close in about 30 minutes or so. So you want to make sure that you get them in by then. A big thank you to everyone who joined us, who submitted questions, and a very, very big thank you to Maude and Roxane. It's really been such a pleasure having you guys join us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, and everybody have a great evening.
You too.